A gypsy girl was set to be burned, her fate hanging by a thread, until a silent gunman stepped out of the shadow. In the unforgiving expanse of the American West, where the sun scorched the earth and the wind howled like a restless spirit, lived a man known as Wyatt Caldwell. Once a respected lawman, Wyatt had retreated into the solitude of his isolated ranch, haunted by the ghosts of his past. The sprawling desert stretched out in all directions. The only company he had was the soft rustle of sagebrush and the distant call of coyotes under a moonlit sky. Wyatt had witnessed the best and worst of humanity, and the weight of his memories pressed heavy on his shoulders. The law had been an unforgiving mistress, and Wyatt's heart bore the scars of choices made in the heat of the moment, choices that echoed long after the dust settled. His home was a modest cabin, weathered by time, standing stoic against the elements, much like its owner. Day after day, he toiled at the farm, wrestling with the land, seeking solace in the rhythm of hard work, while the world outside continued to spin in chaos. But on this particular day, the landscape itself seemed to tremble with the anticipation of change. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson, a commotion erupted in the distance, shattering the quiet of his existence. He strained his ears, catching fragments of shouts and the thud of hooves pounding the earth. A group of men, rough and rowdy, rode hard across the plains, their eyes alight with malice. With a heavy heart, Wyatt stepped outside, the chill of the evening air settling around him like a cloak. He climbed the knoll behind his cabin, a vantage point that offered a glimpse of the unfolding chaos below. There, in a clearing, he saw them, a gaggle of townsfolk, brandishing torches and pitchforks, encircling a terrified young woman. Her hair, dark and wild like the night sky, framed a face twisted in fear. The cries of the crowd were a symphony of hatred, their intentions clear as the stars that began to twinkle above. "Burn the witch!" they shouted, their voices mingling with the crackle of flames that began to lick at the wooden pyre they'd hastily constructed. The girl, a gypsy by the looks of her attire, was bound and helpless, her fate sealed by the ignorance of men blinded by prejudice. In that moment, Wyatt's pulse quickened, memories of his own fallen kin clawing at the edges of his mind. Though he had long abandoned the badge that once commanded respect, he felt the old instinct stir within him, a primal urge to protect the innocent. But stepping into the fray meant risking everything, his life, his freedom, and the fragile peace he had carved out in the wilderness. The townsfolk were a mix of good and bad, and they would not take kindly to dissent. As the torches illuminated the night, Wyatt wrestled with his conscience, the weight of the decision pressing down like the heavy sky before a storm. He knew too well the price of standing against the tide. Yet the sight of the girl's wide, terrified eyes rooted him in place, and he felt an undeniable pull towards her plight. The lines of right and wrong blurred in the shadows of his heart, each pulse of his blood echoing a call for justice. Suddenly, a rustle from the brush nearby caught his attention. Two Native Americans emerged, their faces marked by both fear and determination. The girl's eyes widened in recognition, a glimmer of hope flickering in the depths of her despair. Were they her kin? Wyatt felt a rush of adrenaline course through him as he witnessed the moment. They moved toward her, resolute in their intent to save her from the clutches of the mob. But would they find safety in the face of such fury? The two men were stoic, their features carved with the wisdom of their ancestors, but Wyatt knew the risks they faced. The townsfolk would not hesitate to turn their anger toward anyone who dared to stand in their way, especially when that anyone wore the skin of a different color. He felt the weight of history pressing down upon him, the echoes of his own prejudices whispering in his ear. It was then that the first of the townsfolk spotted the Native Americans, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Look! Savages! Get 'em!" The mob turned as one, a beast awakened, fueled by fear and ignorance. Wyatt's heart raced as the Native Americans stood firm, unyielding in their resolve, but he knew they would not survive the onslaught without help. A choice stood before him, one that could alter the course of not just the girl's life, but his own as well. The heat of the moment bore down on him, forcing him to confront the man he had become. Did he dare defy the mob, risk his own life, and stand for what was right? Or would he turn away, allowing the winds of fate to carry him back to his solitude, forever haunted by the ghosts of inaction? With breath held tight in his chest, Wyatt made his choice. He stepped out from the shadows, his silhouette framed against the dying light, a lone figure against a sea of hate. "Enough!" His voice boomed across the clearing, cutting through the chaos like a knife through flesh. The crowd fell silent, shock rippling through them as they turned to face him. In that moment, Wyatt Caldwell knew that standing for justice would cost him dearly, but the cost of silence was far greater. The stakes were high, and the path forward lay shrouded in uncertainty. But one thing was clear: the battle for righteousness had begun, and he was ready to fight. The tension hung heavy in the air, a palpable force that twisted the hearts of all present. Wyatt's words echoed, reverberating against the rugged terrain, and for a fleeting moment the mob hesitated, caught off guard by the ferocity of his conviction. "Step aside, Caldwell," barked the voice of Sheriff Harrington, his eyes cold and calculating, a man who thrived on fear and intimidation. "You don't want to get involved in this. It's not your fight." Wyatt felt the weight of the crowd's gaze, a mixture of anger and confusion, but he stood firm, a lone bastion against the tide of cruelty. "It is my fight," he declared, his voice steady despite the danger that loomed. "Every life matters, and you know it." The sheriff stepped forward, a sneer twisting his lips. "You think you can save her? She's nothing but a burden, a reminder of the past we're trying to leave behind. You're too soft, Wyatt. Always have been." The words stung, a bitter reminder of the man Wyatt once was, before loss had chiseled away at his heart. He recalled the day he had buried his family, the screams of a different mob echoing in his mind, and the regret that had followed him like a shadow. But that was a different fight, and this time he would not be silenced. "Let her go," he said, the challenge clear in his tone. "You know this isn't right. You're using fear to mask your cowardice." The mob stirred, uncertainty creeping into their ranks. The sheriff's grip tightened on his revolver, but Wyatt had already made his move. He stepped closer to the girl, his eyes softening as he met her frightened gaze. "I won't let them hurt you. You're safe now." In that moment, the winds shifted, a sense of solidarity coalescing between Wyatt and the girl. She nodded, her defiance igniting a spark in the hearts of those who had been wavering. The townsfolk whispered amongst themselves, the lines of loyalty and prejudice blurring as they watched the standoff unfold. But Harrington wasn't finished. "You think you can win them over with your words, Caldwell? They're scared of what they don't understand. All you've done is make yourself a target." And just like that, he raised his gun, a clear and immediate threat. Wyatt felt a surge of adrenaline, the realization dawning that he was outnumbered and outgunned. But the truth, the very essence of what he stood for, was more powerful than any weapon. "Enough of this!" A new voice broke through the tension, a woman stepping forward. It was Clara, a fierce advocate for justice in the town, her reputation built on courage rather than fear. "If you think this is about fear, you're mistaken, Harrington. It's about humanity." The sheriff's eyes narrowed, fury igniting within him. "You'll regret this, Clara. Stand aside, or you'll be in my crosshairs too." But Clara held her ground, her voice unwavering. "If you shoot him, you'll have to shoot me too. This isn't just Wyatt's fight anymore, it's ours." The mob gasped, the realization that some stood against the sheriff, shifting the balance. Wyatt felt a flicker of hope ignite within him, a small fire in the face of overwhelming odds. Harrington surveyed the scene, the fear in his eyes battling against the fury of his authority. "You don't know what you're doing," he warned, but the resolve in Wyatt and Clara's eyes was unyielding. And then it happened, a rustle from the tree line, the sound of hoofbeats approaching rapidly. The crowd turned, eyes wide in disbelief, as a group of Native American riders emerged, their presence like a storm cloud, ready to unleash its fury. The sheriff's bravado faltered as he recognized the riders from the nearby reservation. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to reclaim what was theirs. Wyatt felt the shift in the atmosphere, an awakening of alliances that had long been dormant. The truth was about to unravel, and with it, the fabric of Harrington's conspiracy. As the riders came to a halt, their leader, an imposing figure named Schuyler, met Wyatt's gaze. There was a silent understanding, a shared commitment to fight against the injustice that threatened to consume them all. "Is it true?" Schuyler asked, his voice steady. "Are they trying to burn her?" Wyatt nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. "But we're standing against it. Together." The sheriff's bravado evaporated, his grip on power slipping as the tide turned in favor of justice. The confrontation was no longer just about one girl. It had become a reckoning for the entire town. And in the heart of that reckoning, Wyatt Caldwell felt the stirrings of redemption, the shadows of his past beginning to lift. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in years, he felt the warmth of hope warming the cold corners of his soul. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dry earth as Wyatt and Schuyler stood resolute. But before they could gather their thoughts, the sound of galloping hooves broke the tension. A cloud of dust heralded the arrival of a figure they both recognized. The corrupt sheriff, Harrington, flanked by a group of armed men, their faces set with malice. Wyatt's heart raced as he felt the weight of the law turned against him. Harrington, a man who wore his power like a badge of honor, reined in his horse with a sinister smile. "Well, well, if it ain't the noble rancher and his new friends. What a sight, Wyatt! You've really outdone yourself this time." Schuyler stepped forward, defiance in his stance. "You've done enough, Harrington. Your tyranny ends today." With a scoff, Harrington dismounted, his men fanning out behind him like vultures circling a carcass. "You think you're going to save them? You think this town's going to stand by while you protect a bunch of savages? It's a death wish. I'll remind you, it's my word that keeps the peace around here." Wyatt's jaw clenched. The sheriff had long twisted the law into a noose, tightening it around anyone who dared to resist. "The only peace you bring is built on fear, Harrington. And I won't stand for it any more." Harrington's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. "You're a fool, Wyatt. You've always been one. But let me give you a little advice. You should know when to abandon your principles. It's much easier to survive that way." A tense silence fell between them, thick as smoke, until Wyatt took a deep breath. "Survival isn't living, Harrington. And I'd rather die standing for something than live kneeling to you." And just then, a voice rang out from the crowd of townsfolk that had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. An elderly woman stepped forward, her face a map of scars and wisdom. "They're not savages, Sheriff. They're our neighbors. They're fighting for what's right, just like we should be." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Wyatt felt the tide shifting beneath them. Harrington's confidence wavered, and in that moment of uncertainty, Schuyler took a step closer to Wyatt. "You don't have to do this, Harrington. The truth is coming for you." The sheriff laughed, a hollow sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "Truth? You think that matters? I'm the law here, and I'm about to show you just how misplaced your faith is." Then came the revelation that would change everything. "You should remember what happened at the last treaty signing, Wyatt," Harrington continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It wasn't a peace they wanted. It was a sacrifice. They made it happen, and they'll do it again if it means getting what they want. Schuyler's eyes widened, and Wyatt felt the ground shift beneath him. "What are you saying, Harrington?" Harrington smirked, reveling in the drama. "The girl you're trying to save? She's not just a girl. She's the key to their plans, the one they need to complete their revenge against the town. You're all being played for fools." The revelation hit hard, twisting the knife of doubt deeper into Wyatt's heart. But in that moment of uncertainty, he found clarity. "You're lying, Harrington. This is just another one of your schemes to stir fear." But the sheriff's eyes held a glimmer of truth, and for a moment, the crowd faltered. "Think about it, Wyatt. You're standing between them and their ultimate goal. You'll never win against that." Amidst the doubt swirling in the air, Wyatt felt the stirrings of a plan taking shape in his mind. The stakes had shifted, but so had the resolve in his heart. "The only thing I know for certain, Harrington, is that your time is up. The people of this town deserve better than your lies and manipulation." The crowd began to murmur again, the weight of Harrington's words fueling both fear and determination. "You don't have to fight alone," Wyatt called out, his voice rising above the din. "Together, we can expose him for who he truly is." The sheriff's facade began to crack, the moment of truth hovering just out of reach. The alliance forged in the face of adversity was stronger than Harrington's grip on fear. It was time to stand up, not with guns drawn, but with the undeniable power of unity. And as the crowd rallied behind Wyatt and Schuyler, a glimmer of hope ignited, lighting the path toward justice and redemption, and the stakes for everyone involved grew higher than ever. The crowd, once filled with uncertainty, now surged with a newfound spirit. They could feel the weight of their choices hanging in the air, ready to break the chains of fear that had bound them for so long. Wyatt locked eyes with Schuyler, who stood beside him, her expression a mixture of defiance and hope. Together, they had uncovered the truth, but the battle was far from over. Harrington, sensing his power slipping, took a step forward, his voice a venomous whisper that cut through the hopeful murmurs. "You think they'll stand with you? You're a fool, Wyatt. They'll see you for what you really are, a traitor to your own kind. You're nothing without your gun." But Wyatt stood firm, a solitary figure against the tide of despair. "I'm not here to be your pawn, Harrington. I'm here for the people who've suffered under your tyranny, and I won't back down." The sheriff's eyes darted around the crowd, searching for allies in the sea of faces. There was a flicker of movement at the edge of the gathering. Members of the town, who had once cowered in silence, now stepped forward, emboldened by Wyatt's courage. They had endured Harrington's reign of terror long enough, and the truth was a flame they could no longer ignore. Schuyler, sensing the shift in the crowd, raised her voice, steady and clear. "This isn't just about one life. This is about all of us. We can't allow fear to dictate our actions any longer. We need to stand together for justice, for freedom, for every soul that has been wronged." A murmur spread among the crowd, swelling into a chorus of agreement. They began to chant her words, and Wyatt could see the tide turning. Harrington's grip on power was loosening, replaced by the collective strength of a community that had finally found its voice. But as the momentum built, so too did the danger. A crack of thunder echoed in the distance, and Wyatt knew the storm was not just in the sky. Harrington's eyes darkened with rage, and he quickly summoned his loyal followers, men who thrived on chaos and bloodshed. They moved like shadows, prepared to drown the light of rebellion with violence. Wyatt took a deep breath, realizing that confrontation loomed just ahead. "We don't have to fight like them. We can outsmart them. We need to gather evidence, expose Harrington for the fraud he is. We can rally the townsfolk to our side, and when the truth is laid bare, it will be his downfall." As the crowd listened, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of their growing resolve, they began to formulate a plan. They would gather the testimonies of those who had suffered under Harrington's corrupt regime. They would dig through records, unearth secrets, and present a united front against the sheriff's lies. But in the shadows, something stirred. A figure emerged, eyes narrowed, watching the unfolding drama with keen interest. The true nature of the conspiracy was deeper than Wyatt had anticipated. The stakes rose higher still as he sensed an unseen hand guiding Harrington's malice. A final twist awaited, one that would test their resolve and the very fabric of their unity. Just then, a familiar face stepped forward from the crowd, one that filled Wyatt with dread and uncertainty. It was a man he had thought long gone, a ghost from his past. The weight of revelation pressed down, threatening to unravel everything he had fought for. "Wyatt," the man said, his voice low and measured, "the truth about Harrington runs deeper than you know. Are you ready to face the darkness that lies ahead?" Wyatt's heart raced. In that moment, he understood that the resolution would demand not only courage, but also a willingness to confront his own demons. The path to justice was fraught with peril, but with the community rallying beside him, he felt a flicker of hope. They would fight, not just for one life, but for the soul of the town itself. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the town, Wyatt stood tall amidst the gathered crowd. The weight of his past loomed heavy, yet he drew strength from the faces surrounding him, those of the Native Americans he had sheltered, and of neighbors who had once harbored doubt, but now shared a common purpose. "Today," he began, his voice steady, "we stand not just as individuals, but as a community bound by a belief in justice. Harrington thinks he can manipulate fear to bend us to his will, but he underestimates the power of truth." The crowd murmured in agreement, their resolve hardening like the very earth beneath their feet. "We are more than pawns in his game. We have families, we have stories, and we have the right to live in peace." Wyatt turned his gaze to the Native Americans beside him, their expressions a mixture of gratitude and resilience. "These folks are not our enemies. They've endured more than we can fathom, yet they stand with us today, seeking nothing but a chance to exist freely." With a deep breath, Wyatt continued, "To expose Harrington's corruption, we need to show the town the truth. The land he claims to protect belongs to those who have lived on it long before any laws were written. We will reveal his deceit and stand against his tyranny." As Wyatt spoke, a ripple of unity surged through the crowd. The faces of neighbors transformed from fear to determination, and one by one, hands were raised to show support. They would gather evidence, recount the history of oppression, and shine light on Harrington's dealings, all while the sun set behind them, a fiery testament to their resolve. In the days that followed, alliances formed. The townsfolk met with the Native Americans, sharing stories and piecing together the narrative Harrington had tried to bury. Wyatt's heart swelled as he witnessed the power of collective action, the way fear transformed into courage when people stood shoulder to shoulder for what was right. Then the moment came. The town hall was packed, the air thick with tension and anticipation. Wyatt stood at the forefront, flanked by the Native American leaders and townsfolk, armed with evidence of Harrington's greed. The sheriff, confident and arrogant, took the stage, ready to spin his web of lies. But this time, the truth had a voice. Wyatt stepped forward, presenting the documents that laid bare Harrington's corrupt dealings, the manipulations that had fueled the fire of racial tensions for his profit. The crowd gasped as they realized the depth of his betrayal. "Look around you," Wyatt urged, his voice rising over the whispers of disbelief. "We are not enemies. We are neighbors, friends, and we deserve to live free from the chains of corruption. Harrington has used us against each other, but today we break those chains." As the evidence unfolded, the sheriff's facade began to crack. The once confident man shifted uncomfortably under the weight of truth. The whispers turned into shouts as the townspeople demanded justice. Faced with the irrefutable truth, Harrington's power crumbled like dust in the wind. In the wake of that gathering, the town began to heal. Walls were torn down and bridges were built, not just between races, but between hearts. Wyatt felt an unfamiliar warmth within him, a long-lost sense of belonging. As night fell, he stood outside, gazing at the stars sprinkled across the vast western sky. He reflected on the journey, the pain, the fear, and the courage it took to confront not just an antagonist, but the darkness within. He realized that true justice wasn't merely the absence of oppression. It was the presence of mercy, understanding, and the willingness to stand for what was right, even against the tide of prejudice. In that moment, he understood. The strength of a man lies not just in his gun, but in his heart. And in the unlikeliest of alliances, he found the very essence of courage, which could light the darkest paths. The battle might have been won, but the fight for justice was an ongoing journey, one that he would continue alongside his newfound family, always remembering the lives forever changed by the choices made in the face of adversity. What stories will we write in the face of darkness?